"Step away from the building, hands where I can see them." The voice cuts through the afternoon air like a blade. David Cole turns slowly, hard hat still on, blueprints rolled under his left arm. A sheriff's deputy stands 15 feet away, hand resting on his holster. Not drawn, not yet, but positioned. "I'm the structural engineer on this project." David keeps his voice level, calm, the way his mother taught him 30 years ago. "My authorization documents are in my left pocket." "I didn't ask what you are." The deputy takes 3 steps forward, close enough now that David can read his badge. "Merritt, badge number 4471. I said hands where I can see them." David raises both hands slowly. The blueprints drop to the concrete with a soft thud. The deputy doesn't know. He sees a black man in work clothes standing on a construction site at 2:47 in the afternoon. He sees a trespasser, a suspect, a problem to be solved. He doesn't see the woman who will be sitting in the courtroom gallery 3 days from now. The woman in the gray cardigan and worn leather purse. The woman whose name, when spoken aloud, will make a judge's hands shake. He doesn't see any of that. Not yet. "Turn around. Hands on the wall." David turns, places his palms flat against the unfinished concrete, feels the grit beneath his fingers, the roughness against his skin. Behind him, boots crunch on gravel, coming closer. "You have identification?" "Left pocket, like I said." A hand shoves between his shoulder blades, hard. His chest hits the wall. The deputy's breath is close now, hot against his neck. "I'll tell you when to talk." If you're watching this, hit subscribe right now. You don't want to miss what happens next. 72 hours earlier, David Cole sat at his drafting table in the offices of Hartwell and Associates, Structural Engineering. The morning light slanted through the east-facing windows, casting long shadows across the blueprints spread before him. He worked with the same methodical precision he'd developed over 12 years in the field. Red pen for structural concerns, blue for electrical coordination notes, green for HVAC conflicts. 3 colors, always the same 3, always in the same order. His colleagues had stopped commenting on it years ago. The color-coded folders on his desk, the way he aligned his coffee mug exactly parallel to the keyboard edge, the habit of checking every calculation twice, then once more before submitting. They'd stopped commenting because David Cole's work had never failed an inspection. Not once in 12 years. "Cole." The voice came from the doorway. Sandra Whitmore, senior partner, held a manila folder. "The Midtown Tower site visit. You're still scheduled for this afternoon. 2 o'clock. David didn't look up from the blueprint. "Final structural review before they pour the 3rd-floor slab." "Good. Jenkins called in sick, so you're solo today. That a problem?" "No problem." Sandra lingered for a moment, as if she wanted to say something else. Then she nodded and walked away. Her heels clicked against the tile floor, growing fainter until the sound disappeared entirely. David finished his notation, set down the red pen, and reached for the blue. At 11:30, he ate lunch at his desk. Turkey sandwich, apple, bottle of water. Same lunch he'd eaten every workday for 3 years. His phone buzzed once, a text from his mother. "Call me tonight. Don't forget." He typed back, "I won't." 3 words. Simple. The kind of exchange they'd had thousands of times over 34 years. Nothing in those words suggested what was coming. Nothing hinted at courtrooms or handcuffs or the moment when a judge would look up from his bench and see a ghost he didn't believe in. David finished his sandwich, wiped his hands on a paper napkin, and returned to work. At 1:15, he gathered his materials: blueprints, hard hat, safety vest, authorization badge, site access documentation. He placed each item in his bag in a specific order. Badge first, then documents, then blueprints on top. He'd learned early in his career that construction sites operated on hierarchy. The foreman answered to the project manager answered to the owner, and everyone answered to documentation. Paper was power. Paper was proof. Paper was the difference between a professional doing his job and a stranger where he didn't belong. He drove to the Midtown Tower site, a 17-story mixed-use development that would eventually house retail on the ground floor, offices on floors 2 through 10, and luxury condominiums on floors 11 through 17. David's firm had designed the structural system. His name was on the engineering drawings. His calculations determined where every beam and column would stand. He pulled into the contractor parking area at 1:52. 8 minutes early. He always arrived 8 minutes early, enough time to review his notes, but not enough to seem anxious. The security booth at the main entrance was empty. David waited, checked his watch. 1:54, 1:55, still no guard. He could see workers moving on the upper floors. The distant whine of power tools drifted down. The site was active, operating. Someone should have been at the booth. At 1:58, a man emerged from the portable office trailer 50 yards away. Heavy-set, mid-40s, wearing a security company polo shirt that strained against his gut. He walked toward the booth with the unhurried pace of someone who knew he was late and didn't care. "Help you?" The man didn't introduce himself, didn't apologize for the wait, just stood behind the booth counter and looked at David with the particular expression that David had learned to recognize over 3 decades. The assessment, the calculation, the silent question that asked, "What are you doing here?" without ever speaking the words aloud. David Cole, Hartwell and Associates. He held up his authorization badge. "Structural engineer. I'm here for the 3rd floor slab review." The man, Wells Hadley, according to his name tag, took the badge, studied it, flipped it over, studied the back, then looked at David again with that same expression. "This isn't in my system. I've been coming to this site for 14 months. Not in my system." Hadley shrugged. "Started last week. Only got what they gave me." "Call the project manager, Marcus Webb. He can verify my authorization." Hadley picked up the booth phone, dialed, waited, shook his head. No answer. "Try his cell." "Don't have his cell. Just the office number." The shrug again. "You'll have to come back when someone can verify you." David felt the familiar pressure building behind his eyes, the slow burn that started in his chest and spread outward. He'd felt it 100 times before, 1,000. The pressure of being questioned in spaces where he belonged. The weight of proving, always proving, what others took for granted. He breathed, counted to 3. His mother's voice in his head. "Don't give them a reason. Don't become the story they already wrote." "I have site access documentation in my bag. Authorization letter signed by the project owner, dated last month. Paper can be faked. Then call the owner. Call Hartwell and Associates. Call anyone you want. But I need to complete this inspection today. They're pouring concrete tomorrow morning." Hadley leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms. "Look, buddy, I don't know you. You're not in my system. That's it. Come back with someone who can vouch for you." David looked past Hadley toward the site. The workers, the machinery. The building he had designed rising against the Atlanta skyline. His building, his work. "Fine." He turned back to his car. "I'll make some calls." He sat in the driver's seat with the door open, phone pressed to his ear. Marcus Webb's line went straight to voicemail. The main office number rang 6 times before a receptionist answered, put him on hold, and then informed him that Mr. Webb was in a meeting and couldn't be disturbed. "Can you get him a message? This is urgent." "I'll pass it along." The line went dead. David checked his watch. 2:14. The inspection was supposed to start at 2. The concrete pour was scheduled for 6 the next morning. If he didn't verify the structural connections today, the entire project timeline would slip. He thought about leaving, coming back tomorrow with Marcus Webb in person, paperwork in hand, every question answered before it was asked. The safe choice, the smart choice. But he also thought about the concrete pour, the schedule, the dozens of workers whose jobs depended on this project staying on track, the reputation he'd spent 12 years building, the way people like Wells Hadley looked at him and saw something that needed to be questioned, verified, challenged. He pulled up the Midtown Tower app on his phone, the electronic gate code. He'd received it 6 months ago, along with every other authorized personnel on the project, 4729. He'd used it a dozen times when the main entrance was busy, and he needed quick access to the east side of the site. The code was his, legitimate, documented. He drove around to the side entrance, punched in 4729. The gate swung open. He parked near the materials staging area, grabbed his equipment bag, and walked toward the building. Hard hat on, safety vest visible, badge clipped to his chest, every piece of documentation in place. The gate closed behind him with a soft click. 2:23. He had just over an hour before the crew finished for the day. Plenty of time to check the beam connections, verify the rebar placement, and sign off on the pour. He climbed the construction elevator to the 3rd floor. The wind was stronger up here, whistling through the gaps in the unfinished walls. A crew of 4 was working on the east side, securing formwork for tomorrow's pour. They glanced at him, registered the hard hat and vest and badge, and returned to work. One of them, a white man in his 50s with a sun-weathered face, walked over. "You the inspector?" "Structural engineer. Here to verify the connections before the pour." The man nodded. "Good timing? Foreman was worried you weren't going to show." He jerked his thumb toward the central column cluster. Beam connections are over there. Rebar's all laid out. Let me know if you need anything. Thanks. David spent the next 45 minutes doing his job, measuring, photographing, checking every weld, every bolt, every tie wire against the specifications in his blueprints. Methodical, thorough, the same way he'd done it 100 times before on 100 different sites. At 3:05, he heard the elevator motor engage. He didn't think anything of it. Workers came and went constantly on active sites. He continued his inspection, kneeling to examine a rebar splice at the base of a column. "Sir." The voice was flat, official, the voice of someone who expected to be obeyed. David looked up. A sheriff's deputy stood 10 feet away, hand on his belt. Not his gun, his belt, but positioned, ready. Behind the deputy, Wells Hadley stood with his arms crossed and a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Sir, I'm going to need you to stand up slowly and show me your hands." David rose, kept his hands visible. "I'm the structural engineer on this project. My authorization documents are in my bag." "Uh-huh." The deputy's eyes never left him. "And I received a report of unauthorized entry onto a restricted construction site, trespassing under Georgia Code 16721. So we're going to sort this out one step at a time. I entered through a gate I have authorized access to. The code is registered to my name. Sir, I'm not going to ask again. Turn around, hands on the nearest column." David calculated. The deputy's hand was still on his belt, not his weapon. The workers on the east side had stopped, watching. Hadley was watching. Everyone was watching. He knew how this looked. He knew how it would sound on a report. He knew that every word he spoke, every gesture he made, would be interpreted through a lens that saw what it expected to see. He turned, placed his hands on the concrete column, felt the rough surface against his palms. Behind him, boots approached, the clink of metal, handcuffs being drawn. "I'm telling you right now," David said, keeping his voice calm. "I am authorized to be here. My documentation is in the bag at my feet. You need to verify before you proceed." "I'll verify at the station." The handcuffs closed around his wrists. Too tight. The metal bit into skin. He felt the sharp pinch, the pressure, the instant numbness in his fingertips. "Those are too tight. You'll live." A hand gripped his shoulder, spun him around. The deputy was close now, close enough that David could see the pores in his skin, the faint stubble on his jaw, the cold nothing in his eyes. "Now, let's go." They walked him past the workers, who looked away, past Hadley, who didn't, down 3 floors in the construction elevator, silent except for the mechanical hum of the machinery. Out through the gate he'd entered 40 minutes before. A patrol car waited in the lot. Another deputy stood beside it, a woman in her 40s with sergeant's stripes. She looked at David, looked at Hadley, looked at the first deputy. "This him?" "This is him. Trespassing. Possible burglary tools in that bag." David felt something cold settle in his chest. Burglary tools, his measuring tape, his flashlight, his engineering equipment. "Those are professional instruments for my job as a structural engineer. On this site." The woman's sergeant studied him with an expression he couldn't read. Flat, neutral, professional. "We'll sort it out at the station." They put him in the back of the patrol car. The seats were hard plastic, designed for easy cleaning. The cage separating front from back was scratched and dented. The air smelled like disinfectant and sweat. Through the window, David watched the Midtown Tower grow smaller as they drove away. His building, his work, his calculations made concrete and steel. The deputy in the front seat, Merritt, according to his badge, pulled out his phone and typed something. A message, maybe. A report. David couldn't see the screen. "Sir," David kept his voice steady, "I need you to document that I presented authorization documents before being placed in custody." Merritt didn't respond. "Georgia code requires—" "I know what the code requires." Silence filled the car. The road hummed beneath the tires. Atlanta traffic slid past the windows, ordinary and indifferent. At the processing center, they photographed him, fingerprinted him, took his belt, his wallet, his watch, his phone. They asked him questions he'd answered 1,000 times on 1,000 forms. Name, date of birth, address, occupation. "Structural engineer," he said. "Hartwell and Associates." The intake officer typed without looking up. "Uh-huh." They put him in a holding cell with 3 other men. 2 were sleeping, 1 was pacing. The pacing one was white, early 20s, jittery in a way that suggested substances rather than anxiety. David sat on the metal bench, closed his eyes, breathed. 3 hours. 4. The jittery white kid was released after 20 minutes. A guard came, called his name, unlocked the door. Gone. David waited. At 6:15, a different guard appeared. Cole. David Cole. He stood. This way. You're being processed for arraignment. I need to make a phone call. You'll get your call. They led him to a bank of phones bolted to a concrete wall. He lifted the receiver, dialed his mother's number from memory. She answered on the second ring. David? Mom. He kept his voice low. I'm at Fulton County Processing. I've been arrested. Silence. 1 beat. 2. What are the charges? Criminal trespass. They say I entered a construction site without authorization. Did you? I entered through a gate I have legitimate access to. My documentation proves it. They didn't verify. They just arrested me. Another silence. He could hear her breathing, slow, controlled, the same way she'd taught him to breathe when the world tried to break him. What's your arraignment time? They haven't told me yet. I'll be there. The line went dead. David hung up the phone. A guard led him back to the holding cell. The 2 sleeping men were still sleeping. The pacing one had been replaced by another, older, staring at the ceiling with empty eyes. David sat, closed his eyes, waited. At some point, he must have slept. He woke to fluorescent light and concrete walls and the sound of his name being called. Cole, arraignment in 30 minutes. Let's go. They transported him to the courthouse in a van with no windows. 7 other detainees sat on benches bolted to the floor. No one spoke. The van smelled like fear and exhaustion. At the courthouse, they led him through a side entrance, down a hallway, into a holding room adjacent to the courtroom. He could hear voices through the wall, the murmur of proceedings, the crack of a gavel. His attorney arrived 15 minutes before his hearing, a public defender named Patterson, young, frazzled, holding a stack of folders that threatened to spill from his arms. David Cole? Yes? I'm your court-appointed counsel. Patterson glanced at his file, flipping pages. Trespass charge. First offense? Yes. Good. That helps. More flipping. They're asking for bail. I'll argue for release on recognizance or minimal bond. Judge Brennan's presiding today. He's fair. Mostly fair. We'll see. I have documentation proving I was authorized to be on that site. Patterson looked up. You do? In my bag, which they confiscated. Authorization letter from the project owner, access code assignment from the project management software, my name on the personnel list for the past 14 months. Did you present this to the arresting officer? I told him it was in my bag. He didn't look. Patterson's expression shifted. Something like interest flickered behind his exhausted eyes. That's actually useful. Give me the details. Quick, we have 10 minutes. David told him, the site, the new security guard, the gate code, the documentation. Patterson scribbled notes on the back of another file. Okay, this is good. I'll mention it at arraignment. Probably won't get the charges dismissed today. That'll take a motion and a hearing, but it might help with bail. How much bail are they asking? $15,000. A DA Vance is prosecuting. She's aggressive. The door opened. A bailiff stepped in. Cole, you're up. They led him into the courtroom. It was smaller than he'd expected. Wood-paneled walls. An American flag behind the judge's bench. Gallery benches half filled with waiting families, bored lawyers, and a few people who looked like reporters. David scanned the room as he walked to the defense table, and then he saw her. 3rd row from the back, gray cardigan, worn leather purse on her lap, hands folded, face calm. His mother. She didn't wave, didn't smile, didn't give any sign that she was anything other than an elderly woman waiting for someone else's case to be called. But her eyes met his, held. I'm here, those eyes said. I see everything. All rise. The judge entered. Harold Brennan, according to the nameplate. Mid-60s, silver hair, the permanent frown of a man who'd seen too many guilty people claim innocence. Be seated. David sat. Case number 24, CR 7821. State of Georgia versus David Cole. Charge, criminal trespass under OCGA 16721. How does the defendant plead? Patterson stood. Not guilty, Your Honor. Noted. Ms. Vance, the state's position on bail? A woman rose from the prosecution table. Tall, sharp-featured, with the kind of posture that suggested she'd never been uncertain about anything in her life. The state requests bail of $15,000, Your Honor, while the defendant has no prior record, the nature of the offense, unauthorized entry onto a restricted construction site raises concerns about flight risk and potential for repeat behavior. Patterson stood. Your Honor, my client is a structural engineer with a stable job, strong community ties, and no criminal history whatsoever. The defense respectfully notes that Mr. Cole possessed valid authorization to be on the site in question, including documented access credentials and a letter of authorization from the project owner. We request release on recognizance or, at most, a minimal bond. Judge Brennan looked at his papers, then at David. The assessment again, the calculation. Valid authorization? Yes, Your Honor. Documentation exists proving Mr. Cole was a credentialed professional with legitimate access to the site, and yet he was arrested for trespassing. The arresting officer did not verify the documentation before making the arrest, Your Honor. Brennan's frown deepened. He turned to Vance. Ms. Vance, were you aware of this? The state is aware that the defendant claims to have authorization. We have not yet verified those claims. The arresting officer exercised appropriate discretion in detaining a subject who could not produce verification at the scene. The documentation was in his bag, on site. An unverified document, Your Honor, could have been fabricated. Patterson opened his mouth to respond, but Brennan raised a hand. Enough. I've heard enough. He looked at David again. That long, measuring look. I'm setting bail at $10,000. Defendant will surrender his passport and remain within the county limits pending resolution of this matter. Next court date will be set by the clerk. Patterson leaned close to David. That's better than 15. Can you make 10? $10,000. David had savings. Not much. Engineering paid well, but Atlanta wasn't cheap, but maybe enough for a bail bondsman's fee. I'll figure it out. The gavel cracked. Next case. They led him out of the courtroom through a side door. He looked back once, searching for his mother in the gallery. She was still there, still watching, her hands still folded on her purse, and beside her, an empty seat where someone else might have sat. This story is just getting started. If you're still watching, drop a comment below and tell me what you think happens next. The Fulton County Jail was a concrete block on the edge of downtown, designed for efficiency rather than comfort. David spent his first night on a thin mattress in a cell meant for 2, but holding 4. The other 3 occupants ignored him, which was fine. He preferred silence. In the morning, a guard brought breakfast, rubbery eggs, cold toast, coffee that tasted like it had been brewed 3 days ago. David ate without tasting. His mind was elsewhere, running through documentation, access codes, authorization letters, building a case in his head the way he built structures on paper. At 9:15, another guard appeared. Cole, you made bail. Processing in 20 minutes. He signed for his belongings in a windowless room that smelled like mildew. Belt, wallet, watch. Phone, battery dead. Keys. Everything present, everything accounted for, except his engineering bag, which was being held as evidence. When do I get that back? The clerk shrugged. After the case is resolved. Talk to your lawyer. He walked out of the jail into bright Georgia sunshine. The air felt different out here. Cleaner, or maybe just free. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, breathing, letting the tension drain from his shoulders. A car pulled up. Black sedan. The window rolled down. His mother. Get in. He got in. She pulled away from the curb without a word. They drove in silence for 3 blocks before she spoke. Tell me everything. He did. The site. Hadley. The gate code. Merritt. The handcuffs that were too tight. The questions that weren't answered. The documentation that was never checked. She listened without interrupting. Her hands on the steering wheel were steady. Her eyes stayed on the road. When he finished, she nodded once. The bail was $10,000. I paid it. Mom, I can pay you back. We'll discuss that later. She turned onto Peachtree Street, heading toward his apartment. Right now, you need to focus on clearing your name. What did your lawyer say? Public defender, Patterson. He seems overwhelmed. They always are. Overworked and underpaid. She paused at a red light. I'll be at every hearing, every motion, every appearance. You don't have to... Yes. She looked at him for the first time since he'd gotten in the car. I do. The light changed. She drove. At his apartment building, she pulled to the curb but didn't turn off the engine. Get some sleep, eat something real. Call your office and explain the situation before they hear it from someone else. I'm already on administrative leave. HR sent an email while I was in processing. Her jaw tightened, just for a moment. Then the mask returned. Then you have time to prepare. Use it. He got out of the car. leaned down to the window. "Mom, thank you." She nodded. The window rolled up. The car pulled away. David watched her go, then turned and walked into his building. His apartment was exactly as he'd left it. Neat, organized, everything in its place. He plugged in his phone, made coffee, stood at his window, and looked out at the city while the caffeine tried to cut through 2 days of exhaustion. His phone buzzed. Notifications flooding in. Missed calls from the office. Text messages from colleagues. An email from HR confirming his suspension. And one text from a number he didn't recognize. "Cole, this is Patterson. Call me when you get this. Something's come up with your case," he called. Patterson answered on the first ring. "Cole, good. Listen, I've been reviewing the arrest report. There are some inconsistencies." "What kind of inconsistencies?" "The arresting officer, Merritt. His report says you refused to provide identification and became verbally aggressive when asked to leave the premises." "That's not true. I told him exactly where my documents were. I was completely cooperative." "I believe you, but it's his word against yours unless we can find corroboration." Was anyone else present during the arrest? David thought. The workers on the 3rd floor, the sergeant who arrived later, Hadley, the security guard. There were workers on the upper floor, 4 of them. They might have heard what I said. "Did any of them see you show your credentials?" "I didn't get the chance to show them. Merritt told me to put my hands on the wall before I could reach for my bag." Silence on the line. "What about body camera footage?" David asked. "Don't deputies have to wear cameras?" "They do. I've requested it. Waiting on the department to provide it." "How long will that take?" "Could be days, could be weeks. They're not exactly rushing to help us." David closed his eyes, counted to 3, opened them. "Is there anything else I can do?" "Gather your documentation, the access code assignment, the authorization letter, anything with your name on it that proves you belonged on that site. I'll file a motion to dismiss based on improper arrest procedure, but I need evidence to support it." "I'll get everything." "Good. And Cole?" "Yeah?" "Don't talk to anyone about this case. Not colleagues, not friends, not reporters. Anything you say could be used against you. Understood?" "Understood." He hung up, sat down at his kitchen table, pulled out a legal pad, and began to write. Access code. Received March 15th. Email confirmation in his records. Authorization letter, signed by Marcus Webb, project manager, dated 4 weeks ago. Copy in his files at the office. Personnel list, submitted to security contractor at project start. His name should be in their system. Site visit logs. He'd signed in at the main entrance at least a dozen times over the past 14 months. Records would exist. He wrote for an hour, filling 3 pages with dates, names, documents, building the case the same way he built buildings, one piece at a time, each supporting the next until the structure was too solid to collapse. At noon, his phone rang. The office number. He answered. "David, it's Sandra." His boss, senior partner, the woman who'd wished him luck 2 days ago. "Sandra, I was going to call you." "I know what happened. Everyone knows." Her voice was flat, professional. "The company has placed you on administrative leave pending the resolution of your legal situation." "I saw the email." "There's more." A pause. "We've received inquiries from the media. Someone leaked the arrest report. They're asking questions about why we have an engineer accused of trespassing on a site we designed." "I didn't trespass. I had authorization." "I know what you're claiming, but right now, the optics are bad. The firm can't be associated with a criminal case, even a pending one. Until this is resolved, I need you to stay away from the office and refrain from contacting clients or project sites." "Sandra, this is my career, my reputation. I've worked here for 12 years, and I hope you'll continue to work here for 12 more. But right now, my hands are tied." Another pause. "I'm sorry, David. I really am. Good luck with your case." The line went dead. David set down the phone, looked at his legal pad. 3 pages of documentation that proved he was innocent, and none of it mattered. Not yet. Not until someone with power decided to look. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Patterson filed the motion to dismiss 5 days before, citing insufficient probable cause and failure to verify authorization documents. Judge Brennan denied it without a hearing. "The court finds sufficient evidence exists to proceed to trial," the written ruling said. Motion denied. Patterson called with the news. "I'm sorry, it's not over. We can raise the same arguments at trial, but the motion didn't work." "Why not?" "I don't know. Brennan's usually reasonable. Maybe he's having a bad week. Maybe he decided to err on the side of caution. It's hard to say." "What now?" "Now we prepare for the preliminary hearing. The state will present their evidence, we'll present ours. If If we can show the arrest was improper, maybe the judge will reconsider. The preliminary hearing was held on a Tuesday morning. David arrived early, wearing the same suit he'd worn to his last project presentation. Navy blue, conservative cut, professional. His mother was already in the gallery, third row from the back. Same gray cardigan, same worn purse, same calm, watchful expression. The prosecution presented first. A DA Vance called Deputy Merritt to the stand. "Deputy, please describe the events of August 14th. Merritt sat straight in the witness chair, confident, rehearsed. "At approximately 2:30 p.m., I received a dispatch call regarding a possible trespasser at the Midtown Tower construction site. I responded to the scene and found the defendant on the third floor of the building. I asked him to identify himself and explain his presence. He refused to provide identification and became verbally aggressive." David's hands clenched under the table. Refused. Aggressive. Lies. "What did you do then?" "I instructed him to place his hands on the wall so I could conduct a safety pat-down. He complied. I then placed him under arrest for criminal trespass." "Did you search his belongings?" "I secured his bag as evidence. At the station, we inventoried the contents. Measuring equipment, a flashlight, documents that appeared to be related to the construction site." "Appeared to be?" "They weren't verified. Could have been fabricated." Patterson rose for cross-examination. "Deputy Merritt, did the defendant tell you he was the structural engineer on the project?" "He made a claim to that effect." "Did he tell you his authorization documents were in his bag?" "He said a lot of things." "Did you check his bag at the scene?" "No." "Did you contact project management to verify his identity?" "That's not my job." "Did you contact dispatch to run his credentials?" "I arrested him based on the report of unauthorized entry and his refusal to provide identification." "He didn't refuse, Deputy. He told you exactly where his identification was. In his left pocket. That's in your own body camera footage." Merritt's jaw tightened. He was reaching for his pocket. That's a safety concern. "So you arrested him without verifying his identity because he was reaching for the pocket where his identification was located?" "I arrested him based on probable cause." Patterson pulled a document from his file. "Deputy, I have here the body camera footage from your arrest of Mr. Cole. At minute 1, 14 seconds, Mr. Cole clearly states, quote, 'I'm the structural engineer on this project. My authorization documents are in my left pocket.' Your response was, quote, 'I didn't ask what you are.' Is that accurate?" Merritt's face was stone. "That's what I said." "And you never checked his pocket?" "No." "You never contacted project management?" "No." "You never verified his access credentials?" "No." No further questions. Patterson sat down. David let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. Vance called her next witness. Wells Hadley. The security guard walked to the stand with the same unhurried pace he'd used at the site, settled into the chair, looked at David with that small smile. "Mr. Hadley, please describe your interaction with the defendant on August 14th. He showed up at the gate around 2 o'clock, wanting onto the site. I asked for credentials. He showed me a badge, but it wasn't in my system. I told him he'd have to come back when someone could verify him. What happened then? He got angry, left. Then, about 20 minutes later, I saw him on the third floor. He'd gone around to the side gate and let himself in. Without authorization? Without authorization from me. I called it in." Patterson's cross-examination was brief. "Mr. Hadley, how long have you worked at the Midtown Tower site?" "About a week at that point." "Were you given a complete personnel list when you started?" "I was given a list." "Was David Cole's name on that list?" Hadley shrugged. "I don't remember seeing it." "Did you check the list before denying him entry?" "I checked my system. He wasn't there." Patterson pulled another document. "Mr. Hadley, I have here an email sent from Marcus Webb, the project manager, to your security office 3 days before Mr. Cole's arrest. The subject line reads, 'Contractor Access List.' In this email, Mr. Webb writes, and I quote, 'Attached is the updated access list for Midtown Tower. David Cole, structural engineer, is authorized for site access during Project Phase 3. Did you receive this email?" Hadley shifted in his seat. "I might have. I get a lot of emails." "Did you check this email before denying Mr. Cole access?" "Like I said, I checked my system." "But not your email." "I was busy, new job, lot to learn." No further questions. Judge Brennan listened to closing arguments with the same frown he'd worn throughout the hearing. When both sides finished, he shuffled his papers for a long moment. "The court finds sufficient evidence exists to proceed to trial. Bail conditions remain in place. Trial date will be set by the clerk. The gavel cracked. David sat frozen. Patterson touched his arm. This isn't over. We'll get our day in court. He didn't even consider the evidence. He considered it. He just didn't weigh it the way we wanted. Patterson gathered his files. Look, I know this is frustrating, but we've laid groundwork. The body camera footage is on record now. Hadley's testimony shows he didn't check his email. We can build on this. When's the trial? Could be 2 months, could be 6. Depends on the court calendar. 6 months. Half a year of suspension. Half a year of his reputation crumbling. Half a year of waiting. David stood, looked toward the gallery. His mother was still there, still watching, but she wasn't alone anymore. A bailiff stood beside her, leaning down, saying something in her ear. She shook her head slightly. The bailiff straightened, moved away. David frowned. What was that about? Patterson followed his gaze. Friend of yours? My mother. Oh, that's good. Family support helps. He snapped his briefcase closed. I'll call you when we have a trial date. In the meantime, stay out of trouble and gather more documentation if you can. He walked away. David watched him go, then made his way to the gallery. His mother rose as he approached. Her face was calm, but something moved behind her eyes, something he couldn't quite read. What did the bailiff want? Nothing important. She gathered her purse. Let's go. They walked out of the courthouse together into the bright afternoon sun. At the bottom of the steps, she stopped. The judge denied the motion. I know. I was there. And he denied the evidence. He said it wasn't weighed. I watched him. Her voice was quiet, precise. He didn't weigh it because he'd already decided. Before the hearing started. Maybe before he read the file. David stared at her. You can't know that. I've spent 30 years reading courtrooms. I know. She looked up at the courthouse behind them. Harold Brennan has a reputation. Mostly fair, people say. But mostly fair means sometimes unfair. And today, he was unfair to you. What can I do about it? She turned back to him. Her eyes were steady, hard. The eyes of a woman who had seen injustice before and knew exactly what it looked like. For now, nothing. You wait. You document. You prepare. She placed a hand on his arm. But I will be at every hearing. Every motion. Every moment. And when the time comes, I will be ready. Ready for what? She didn't answer. Just squeezed his arm once, then walked toward her car. David watched her go, questions churning in his mind. What was she planning? What did she know? And why, when the bailiff had approached her, had her expression flickered, just for an instant, into something that looked almost like recognition? The weeks that followed blurred together. David woke each morning in his empty apartment, ate breakfast alone, and spent his days gathering documentation. Emails, access logs, project files, everything that proved he belonged on that site. He contacted Marcus Webb, the project manager, who apologized profusely but couldn't testify without company approval. He contacted Hartwell and Associates, who reminded him that he was on administrative leave and couldn't access company files. He contacted the workers who'd been on the 3rd floor that day, but none of them would return his calls. The system closed around him like a fist. 3 weeks after the preliminary hearing, he received a call from an unknown number. Mr. Cole, this is Detective Riley, Fulton County Internal Affairs. David's heart stuttered. Internal Affairs? Yes, sir. I've been assigned to review certain aspects of your case, specifically the conduct of Deputy Merritt during your arrest. Would you be willing to answer some questions? Yes, of course. Good. Can you meet me tomorrow at 10? My office is in the county building, 4th floor. I'll be there. The next morning, David sat across a metal desk from Detective Riley. A black woman in her 40s, sharp-eyed, wearing plain clothes and a detective's badge clipped to her belt. Mr. Cole, I've reviewed the body camera footage from your arrest. I have some concerns. What kind of concerns? Deputy Merritt's report states you refused to provide identification and became verbally aggressive. The footage shows the opposite. You were cooperative. You told him exactly where your documents were. He didn't check. David exhaled. Finally, someone who saw it. I've been saying that since day one. I know. I've read your statements. Riley opened a file on her desk. Mr. Cole, what I'm about to tell you is not public information, but I think you have a right to know. Okay? Deputy Merritt has been flagged before, 7 times in the past 18 months. All similar incidents. Traffic stops, arrests, all subjects black, All charges dropped before trial. David felt the room tilt. 7 times. 7 documented incidents. There may be more that weren't reported. She closed the file. I can't promise anything. Internal investigations take time. But I wanted you to know that you're not alone. And you're not wrong. What happens now? Now I continue my investigation. You continue your case. Eventually our paths may cross again. She stood, extended her hand. Good luck, Mr. Cole. He shook her hand, walked out of the county building into the afternoon sun. 7 times. 7 arrests. All dropped. Why? That night, his mother called. There's been a development. David set down his dinner fork. What kind of development? I can't discuss it on the phone. Meet me at my house tomorrow, 6 p.m. She hung up before he could ask anything else. He arrived at her house the next evening, a modest 2-story in a quiet neighborhood, the same house she'd lived in for 20 years. She opened the door before he knocked. Come in, we need to talk. The living room was neat, orderly, books lining the walls. She gestured to the couch. He sat. She remained standing. I've been making inquiries, she said, discreetly, through channels. What kind of channels? Professional ones. She paused. David, what do you know about Judge Harold Brennan? He's the judge on my case. Patterson says he's mostly fair. Mostly fair. She almost smiled. Do you know his history? His record? No. I do. I've spent the last 2 weeks reviewing it. She walked to her desk, picked up a folder, handed it to him. Harold Brennan has been on the bench for 23 years. In that time, he's presided over 1,400 criminal cases. His conviction rate is 72%. That seems normal. It is. But his conviction rate for defendants of color is 89%. For white defendants, it's 58%. David stared at the folder in his hands, the numbers blurred, then sharpened. That's a pattern. She sat down across from him. It doesn't prove anything. Statistics can be interpreted many ways, but combined with what I saw in that courtroom, the way he dismissed your evidence without consideration, it suggests something. Suggests what? Suggests that you're not getting a fair trial, and that you're not the first. David opened the folder. Pages of data, court records, case numbers, conviction rates broken down by race, by charge, by outcome. Where did you get this? Public records, mostly. It took time to compile, but everything in there is documented. Why are you doing this? She looked at him. Really looked. The way she'd looked at him when he was 7 and came home crying because a kid at school called him a name he didn't understand. Because you're my son. And because I've spent my life watching systems fail people who look like us. And because sometimes the only way to fix something is to shine a light on it until everyone can see what was always there. Mom. He set down the folder. What are you planning? She stood, walked to the window, looked out at the quiet street, the evening light fading to purple. At your next hearing, she said, I'm going to speak, not as your mother, as someone with information relevant to the proceedings. They won't let you. You're not a lawyer. You're not a witness. They'll let me. She turned back to him. When they find out who I am. Who you... David stopped, stared at her. At this woman he'd known his entire life, who wore gray cardigans and carried a worn purse, and had never once told him what she did for a living beyond government work. Mom, who are you? She smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her since this started. I'm your mother. That's what matters. She walked toward the kitchen. Now, have you eaten? I made dinner. He wanted to push, to demand answers. But he knew that look. The conversation was over. For now. He followed her to the kitchen and tried to ignore the feeling that he was standing on the edge of something vast, something that had been hidden from him his entire life, something that was about to crack open and swallow everything he thought he knew. If you've made it this far, you need to see what happens in part 2. The reveal will change everything. 3 weeks later, another hearing. Another morning in the same courtroom with the same frown on Judge Brennan's face. But this time, something was different. David felt it the moment he walked in. A tension in the air, eyes cutting toward the gallery, whispers that stopped when he got too close. Patterson met him at the defense table. Something's going on. I don't know what. What do you mean? The prosecution filed a supplemental motion this morning, sealed. I don't know what's in it. David looked toward the prosecution table. A DA Vance sat rigid, hands flat on the surface, staring straight ahead. She didn't look confident anymore. She looked nervous. The bailiff called the court to order. Judge Brennan entered, took his seat. shuffled papers. Case number 24, CR 7821, State v. Cole. He looked up. Counsel, I've reviewed the supplemental motion. Before we proceed, is there anything either party wishes to add? Vance stood. No, Your Honor. Patterson stood. The defense was not provided a copy of the supplemental motion, Your Honor. We request. It's sealed for a reason, Counsel. Brennan cut him off. The court will address its contents if and when appropriate. David's stomach tightened. What was in that motion? The hearing proceeded. Evidence was discussed. Motions were argued. The same dance they'd done before, with the same predictable steps. And then, at 11:42, the courtroom doors opened. Two people walked in. The first was Detective Riley from Internal Affairs. She wore a dark suit now, professional, carrying a folder under her arm. The second was David's mother. She walked with the same measured pace she always used. Gray cardigan, worn purse, no expression on her face, but something was different. Something in the way she moved. Something in the way the bailiff stepped aside without being asked. Something in the way Detective Riley walked half a step behind her, deferential. Judge Brennan looked up, frowned. This hearing is in session. If you're here for another case, Your Honor. His mother's voice cut through the room. Clear, authoritative. A voice David had never heard her use before. I apologize for the interruption, but I have information directly relevant to these proceedings that cannot wait. Ma'am, this is a criminal trial. You can't simply... My name is Vivian Cole. She reached into her purse, pulled out a slim leather case, opened it, held it up so the entire courtroom could see. A badge, a federal badge. I'm a United States Circuit Judge, 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, and I've been observing this case for 6 weeks. Silence. Total, absolute silence. David stared at his mother, at the badge in her hand, at the transformation happening before his eyes. The woman in the gray cardigan was gone. In her place stood someone else, someone whose spine was steel, whose eyes held 30 years of authority, whose presence commanded the room simply by existing. Judge Brennan's face went white. Judge Cole! His voice cracked. We weren't informed. You weren't informed because I didn't want you informed. I wanted to see how this court operates when it thinks no one is watching. She walked forward. Every eye in the room followed her. She stopped at the bar separating the gallery from the well of the court. Detective Riley has provided me with documentation of a pattern of misconduct in this case. Body camera footage that contradicts the arrest report, email evidence that the defendant's authorization was properly documented, and statistical analysis suggesting a troubling pattern of bias in cases before this court. Brennan's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Judge Cole, I must object. This is highly irregular. Irregular? She tilted her head. What's irregular is a judge who ignores evidence because it doesn't fit his preferred narrative. What's irregular is an arresting officer with 7 similar incidents in 18 months, all dismissed without investigation. What's irregular is a system that protects its own at the expense of the citizens it's supposed to serve. She turned to Detective Riley. Detective, please present your findings. Riley stepped forward, opened her folder. Your Honor, Internal Affairs has completed a preliminary review of Deputy Gage Merritt's conduct record. We've identified a pattern of racially selective enforcement consistent with the allegations in this case. Additionally, we've discovered that 3 formal complaints against Deputy Merritt were improperly expunged from his personnel file 2 weeks ago, without authorization from the review committee. The gallery erupted. Whispers became murmurs, became outright conversation. Brennan banged his gavel. Order! Order! But the damage was done. The cracks were spreading. The carefully maintained facade was crumbling. And David sat at the defense table, watching his mother, the woman who had packed his lunches and helped with his homework, and never once mentioned that she was a federal judge, tear the system apart with nothing but words and documentation and the accumulated weight of 30 years of authority. Your Honor, Vivian's voice cut through the chaos. I'm recommending this case be referred to the Georgia Judicial Qualifications Commission for review. I'm also notifying the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division of the pattern evidence discovered in this investigation. Brennan's face had gone from white to gray. His hands trembled on the bench. This is unprecedented. No, Your Honor. Vivian shook her head. This is accountability, and it's long overdue. She turned, walked back toward the gallery, paused beside David's table. For just a moment, her hand touched his shoulder, a mother's touch. Brief, gentle. Then she was gone, walking out the doors with Detective Riley behind her. David sat in the sudden silence, his mind reeling, his world rearranged. His mother was a federal judge. His mother had been watching. His mother had been waiting. And now, everything was about to change. But change, David would learn, doesn't happen overnight. The hearing was suspended. Brennan recused himself, not voluntarily, but after a phone call from someone whose name was never spoken aloud. A new judge was assigned. Motions were filed. Counter-motions were filed. The machinery of justice ground forward at its own glacial pace. 2 weeks later, the DA's office announced it was dropping all charges against David Cole in the interest of justice. No apology, no explanation, just a press release and a closed file. Deputy Merritt was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Not fired, not arrested, just sidelined. Wells Hadley resigned from his security position. No charges filed. No consequences beyond the loss of a job he'd only had for 3 weeks. And Judge Brennan announced his retirement 6 weeks later, citing personal reasons. The Judicial Qualifications Commission investigation was ongoing. No findings had been issued. No verdict had been reached. Justice, such as it was, came in pieces. Incomplete. Imperfect. A crack in the wall, not a collapsed building. David returned to work after 3 months. His reputation, he discovered, had survived. Barely. Some colleagues welcomed him back. Others avoided his eyes. The partners assured him that everything was fine, that his job was secure, that the misunderstanding was behind them. But nothing was the same. He noticed things now. The way security guards tracked him in buildings where he had every right to be. The way clients glanced at his face before shaking his hand. The way routine verification seemed to follow him to every new site. The system hadn't changed. It had just learned to be more careful. On a Thursday evening, 6 months after his arrest, David sat in his mother's kitchen. The same kitchen where he'd eaten 1,000 meals. The same table where he'd done his homework as a child. But the woman across from him was different now. Or maybe he was just seeing her clearly for the first time. "Why didn't you tell me?" Vivian sipped her tea, set the cup down carefully. "What would you have done if I had?" "I don't know. But I deserve to know." "Did you?" She met his eyes. "When you were 7 and that boy called you a name, did you need to know that your mother could have made one phone call and had his father investigated for tax fraud? When you were 18 and that professor gave you a C you didn't deserve, did you need to know that I could have called the university president and had him reviewed?" "That's not the same." "It's exactly the same." Her voice was quiet, gentle, but firm. "You needed to earn your own way. Build your own reputation. Be judged on your own merits, not your mother's position. If I'd told you, you would have wondered. Every success, every failure, whether it was real or whether someone made a call." David stared at his tea. The steam rose in slow curls. "And this time?" "This time was different. This time you did everything right, and the system still failed you. That's not something you can fix yourself. That's something that requires intervention. So you intervened. I exposed. There's a difference." She leaned forward. "I didn't make the judge recuse himself. I didn't force the DA to drop charges. I just made sure that everyone could see what was happening. The system protected itself by cutting loose the parts that were too visible to defend." "And that's justice?" She was quiet for a long moment. "No," she finally said. "That's survival. Justice would require accountability, real consequences, systemic change." She shook her head. "We got visibility. We got documentation. We got a crack in the wall. But the wall is still standing." David looked at his mother. This woman who had kept her power hidden for 34 years. This woman who had watched him struggle and fail and succeed without ever revealing the hand she could have played. What happens now? Now? She smiled, sad and proud and tired all at once. Now you go back to work, you build things, you live your life, and you remember that the system isn't built to protect you, it's built to protect itself. So you document, you prepare, and when the moment comes, "I'll be ready," she nodded. "You'll be ready." Outside the window, the Atlanta skyline glittered in the darkness. Somewhere out there, Deputy Merritt was still on paid leave. Judge Brennan was still a retired judge with a full pension. Wells Hadley was still free, probably working another security job somewhere. The crack was real, but the wall remained. And somewhere in a folder on Detective Riley's desk, a single page sat with a name redacted in black ink. A name that connected to other names, other incidents, other cracks that hadn't been exposed yet. GB, 2 initials. No explanation, no context. Just a thread, waiting to be pulled. David finished his tea, said goodbye to his mother, drove home through streets that looked the same as they always had. But he knew now. He knew what lived beneath the surface, and he knew that this story, his story, wasn't over. It was just beginning. The phone call came at 6:14 in the morning. David was already awake, standing at his kitchen window with a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands. 3 weeks had passed since his mother revealed herself in that courtroom. 3 weeks of silence from the legal system. 3 weeks of waiting. The number on his screen was blocked. He answered anyway. "Mr. Cole?" The voice was male, unfamiliar, flat. "You've made some powerful enemies. Who is this?" "Someone who's been watching. Someone who knows what happens to people who embarrass the wrong departments." David's grip tightened on the phone. "If you're trying to threaten me, I'm trying to warn you. The investigation into Merritt, it's going to disappear. The complaints against Brennan, already being buried. Your mother made a lot of noise, but noise fades. And when it does, the people she embarrassed will remember who started it. I didn't start anything. I was arrested for doing my job. You think that matters?" A dry laugh. "You're a symbol now, an example, and examples have a way of being made." The line went dead. David stood in his kitchen, phone still pressed to his ear, listening to nothing. Outside his window, Atlanta was waking up. Cars on the street, lights flickering on in neighboring buildings. An ordinary morning in an ordinary city, but nothing felt ordinary anymore. He called his mother at 7. She answered on the first ring. "Someone called me, anonymous. They said the investigation is going to disappear." Silence. Then, "Tell me exactly what they said." He repeated the conversation word for word. His mother listened without interrupting. "Did you record it?" "No, I didn't think. It's fine. Most phones don't record incoming calls automatically anyway." A pause. "David, I need you to be careful. Don't go anywhere alone if you can avoid it. Document everything. Times, places, anyone who approaches you. And don't talk to anyone about the case without a lawyer present." "You think they're serious? About making me an example?" "I think," she said slowly, "that we've exposed something bigger than one deputy and one judge. And the people connected to that, something don't like being exposed. What do? We keep pushing. We document. We prepare." Her voice hardened. "And we don't let them scare us into silence." She hung up. David stood in his kitchen, watching the morning light creep across the floor, and wondered what he'd gotten himself into. If you're still here, you're about to see how deep this goes. Subscribe now. You don't want to miss what happens next. The first sign of pushback came 2 days later. David arrived at a project site in Buckhead, a new commercial development, where he'd been assigned to review foundation work. It was his first field assignment since returning from administrative leave. A test, maybe. A chance to prove he could still do his job without incident. The security guard at the gate was young, early 20s, with the nervous energy of someone new to the job. He took David's credentials, scanned them, frowned at his computer screen. "Sir, I'm showing a flag on your file." David's stomach dropped. "What kind of flag?" "It says..." "Hold on." The guard typed something, squinted at the screen. "It says to verify your identity through secondary channels before granting access." "Secondary channels? I have to call my supervisor." David waited. The guard made a call, spoke in low tones, glanced at David twice. Finally, he hung up. "Sir, I've been told to deny you access to the site pending verification from your company." "I have authorization. It's right there in your system." "I understand, sir, but the flag isn't authorization. My credentials are authorization. Your system shows I'm cleared for this site." The guard shifted uncomfortably. "I'm just following orders, sir." Orders. David had heard that word before. In a courtroom, in a patrol car. In every interaction where someone with a little power decided to use it against him. He pulled out his phone, called Sandra Whitmore directly. "Sandra, I'm at the Buckhead site. Security won't let me in. They're saying there's a flag on my file." Silence. Then, "Hold on. Let me check." He waited. The guard watched him with a mixture of suspicion and discomfort. Other workers walked past, flashing badges, passing through without incident. Sandra came back on the line. "David, I don't see any flag in our system. This must be on their end. Can you call them? Clear it up?" "I'll try. But David..." She hesitated. "This is the third site that's reported issues with your credentials this week." "Third?" "The other two resolved themselves before you arrived. I didn't want to worry you." David closed his eyes, counted to 3, opened them. "Someone's doing this deliberately." "I don't know that for certain." "I do." He hung up. looked at the guard, who was pretending to study his computer screen. You can tell whoever put that flag in my file that it won't work. I'll be back tomorrow, and the day after, and every day until someone with actual authority tells me I can't do my job. He turned and walked back to his car. Behind him, the guard picked up his phone and made another call. That night, Detective Riley called. "Mr. Cole, we need to talk. In person, tomorrow if possible." "What's happened?" "Not over the phone. My office. 10 a.m. The line went dead before he could ask anything else. He arrived at Riley's office the next morning at 9:55. She was waiting in the lobby, which struck him as unusual. Detectives didn't usually come down to meet people they'd invited. "Follow me," she said. "We're not meeting in my office." She led him to a conference room on a different floor, windowless, soundproofed. She closed the door, checked the corners of the room, looking for something, though David couldn't tell what, and finally sat down across from him. "What's going on?" "The investigation into Deputy Merritt has been suspended." David felt the words hit him like a physical blow. "Suspended? Why?" "Officially. Lack of sufficient evidence to proceed." "And unofficially?" Riley's jaw tightened. "Someone made calls. I don't know who. But yesterday I was told to close my file and move on to other cases." "They can do that? Just shut it down?" "They can do whatever they want. Internal Affairs operates at the discretion of department leadership. If leadership decides a case isn't worth pursuing, it gets buried." David leaned back in his chair. The anonymous caller had been right. The investigation was disappearing. "So that's it? Merritt walks? Brennan retires with a full pension? Everyone who did this to me just gets away with it?" "Not necessarily." Riley leaned forward. "I made copies of everything before they took my files. Unofficial copies, stored somewhere they can't access. Is that legal? Probably not. But I didn't become a detective to help cover up misconduct." She pulled a USB drive from her pocket, slid it across the table. "This contains all the documentation I gathered. Body camera footage, personnel records, the pattern analysis, everything." David stared at the drive. "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because you have something I don't. A federal judge in your corner. If this information gets to the right people, DOJ, the FBI, federal oversight, it can't be buried as easily. You want me to give this to my mother. I want you to give it to whoever can use it. I don't care who, as long as it doesn't disappear." She stood. "I have to get back. If anyone asks, this meeting never happened." She walked out without another word. David sat alone in the soundproofed room, holding a USB drive that contained either the key to justice or the match that would burn everything down. Maybe both. He gave the drive to his mother that evening. She plugged it into her laptop without hesitation, scrolled through files. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes moved faster and faster across the screen. "Detective Riley compiled this?" "Yes." "She's risking her career." "She knows." Vivian continued scrolling. Stopped. Leaned closer to the screen. "David, come look at this." He moved behind her, looked at the document she'd pulled up. An internal memo, dated 6 months before his arrest. The header read, "Fulton County Sheriff's Office, confidential." Most of the text was routine. Scheduling updates, equipment requests, training reminders, but one paragraph had been highlighted by Riley. Per Lieutenant Dresden's directive, all complaints regarding traffic stop procedures are to be routed through his office for preliminary review before entering the formal complaint system. This will ensure consistency in documentation and reduce administrative burden on the Internal Affairs Division. "Lieutenant Dresden," David said. "I've heard that name. Who is he?" According to Riley's notes, he's the supervisor who authorized the expungement of 3 complaints against Deputy Merritt. Vivian's voice was flat, cold. "This memo gives him control over which complaints even reach Internal Affairs. He can kill investigations before they start." "So he's protecting Merritt." "He's protecting the department. Merritt is just one piece." She scrolled to another document. "Look at this. A list of officers who've had complaints routed through Dresden's office in the past 2 years. David scanned the list. 14 names. Merritt was one of them. How many of these officers faced disciplinary action? According to Riley's analysis, 0. Every complaint was dismissed at the preliminary review stage. David felt sick. This is systematic, organized. Someone built this on purpose. "Yes." Vivian closed the laptop. "And Dresden didn't build it alone. He doesn't have the authority. Someone above him set this up. Someone who wanted a mechanism to protect officers from accountability. Who? I don't know yet." She stood, walked to her window. "But I know people who can find out. Federal people. People who investigate exactly this kind of institutional corruption. DOJ? Civil Rights Division. They have jurisdiction over pattern or practice investigations. If we can show them systematic suppression of misconduct complaints, they can open a formal inquiry. How long would that take? Months, maybe years. Federal investigations move slowly. She turned back to him. But they're also much harder to bury. Once the DOJ opens a file, local officials can't make it disappear with a phone call. David looked at the laptop, the USB drive, the mountain of evidence that Detective Riley had risked her career to preserve. "Do it," he said. "Whatever it takes. I want them to answer for this." His mother nodded, picked up her phone. "I'll make some calls." The next 3 weeks were quiet. Too quiet. David returned to work, completed site visits, attended meetings. The flags on his credentials disappeared as mysteriously as they'd appeared. No more anonymous phone calls, no more threatening messages. It felt like the calm before a storm. On a Tuesday afternoon, David was reviewing blueprints in his office when his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Check your mail." He almost deleted it. Almost dismissed it as spam or another threat. But something made him pause. He walked down to the building's mailroom. His box contained the usual: bills, advertisements, a professional journal he subscribed to, and one envelope with no return address, plain white. His name typed on the front, no postmark, which meant it had been hand-delivered. He opened it in the elevator, away from prying eyes. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a printout of an email. The sender and recipient addresses had been blacked out with marker, but the content was visible. Subject: Target confirmed, GB. The situation is under control. Cole's credentials have been flagged across multiple sites. His employer is receiving inquiries about his reliability. The mother is a complication, but federal judges can investigate local matters directly. She'll need to go through channels, and channels can be managed. If he continues to be a problem, we have other options. Discussed previously, you know the timeline. Proceeding as planned. W.H. David read it twice, 3 times. W.H. Wells Hadley, the security guard who'd denied him access, the witness who'd called 911, GB, the initials from the redacted page in Riley's files. Someone had sent him proof that his targeting wasn't random. It was coordinated, planned, and whoever GB was, they were running the operation. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from anger. Pure, cold, clarifying anger. He photographed the letter, photographed the envelope. Then he called his mother. "I just received something. You need to see it." This conspiracy goes deeper than anyone imagined. If you want to see who's really behind it, keep watching. They met at her house that evening. Vivian studied the letter for a long time, turning it over, holding it up to the light, examining every detail. Hand-delivered, no postmark. Whoever sent this wanted to make sure it couldn't be traced through the postal system. Who would send this? Riley? Possibly. Or someone else inside the department who wants this exposed but can't do it openly. She set the letter down. W.H. is almost certainly Wells Hadley. The writing style, the reference to flagging credentials, it fits. And GB? I don't know. The initials don't match anyone in the files Riley gave us, but they're clearly in a position of authority. Hadley is reporting to them, taking direction. Could it be Dresden, the lieutenant? His initials are GD, not GB. Vivian shook her head. This is someone else, someone we haven't identified yet. What do? We add this to the evidence package for DOJ, and we try to find out who GB is. She paused. David, I need to ask you something. The letter mentions other options if you continue to be a problem. A timeline. Do you understand what that might mean? He understood. He didn't want to say it out loud, but he understood. They're threatening me. They're discussing contingencies. It's not the same as an active threat, but it's close. Her voice hardened. From now on, I want you to vary your routines. Don't take the same route to work every day. Don't be predictable. And if anything seems wrong, anything at all, you call me immediately. You really think they'd go that far? I think people who build systems to protect misconduct don't like it when those systems are exposed. I think they've invested years in this, and I think they see you as the thread that could unravel everything. David looked at the letter on the table, the casual language, other options, timeline. Proceeding as planned, like he was a project to be managed, a problem to be solved. I'm not going to hide, he said. I'm not going to let them scare me into silence. I'm not asking you to hide. I'm asking you to be smart. His mother's hand covered his. We're going to win this. But we have to survive long enough to fight. The DOJ responded to Vivian's inquiry 3 weeks later, a formal letter on Department of Justice letterhead signed by someone in the Civil Rights Division. Dear Judge Cole, thank you for your correspondence regarding potential civil rights violations in Fulton County. After preliminary review of the materials you provided, the Civil Rights Division has determined that further investigation is warranted. We are opening a preliminary inquiry into the Fulton County Sheriff's Office under 42 U.S.C. Section 14,141, which authorizes the department to investigate law enforcement agencies engaged in a pattern or practice of conduct that deprives persons of constitutional rights.
This inquiry is civil in nature and does not constitute a finding of wrongdoing. However, we take all allegations of discriminatory policing seriously and will conduct a thorough review. An investigator will be in contact within the next 30 days to arrange interviews and document review. Respectfully, Civil Rights Division, U.S. Department of Justice. David read the letter in his mother's living room. They're actually doing it. They're investigating. Preliminary inquiry. It's a first step, not a guarantee. But Vivian was smiling, a small, tight smile of satisfaction. They'll assign investigators, review documents, interview witnesses. If they find enough evidence of systemic problems, they can file a lawsuit or negotiate a consent decree. How long? Could be a year.
Could be 3. Federal investigations are thorough. That's their strength and their weakness. But they can't make it disappear, like they did with Riley's investigation? No. Once DOJ opens a file, it stays open until they close it. Local officials have no authority to interfere. She set the letter down. This is what we wanted. This is why we pushed. Now we let the system work. David wanted to feel relief, satisfaction, victory. But the letter in the anonymous envelope still haunted him. Other options. Timeline. The system was working, but so were the people trying to stop it. 2 weeks after the DOJ letter arrived, David was leaving a project site in Marietta when he noticed the car, dark sedan, tinted windows, parked across the street from the site entrance when he arrived, still there when he left, 3 hours later. He'd seen the same car, or one identical to it, near his apartment building 2 days ago. He didn't panic. He'd been trained not to panic. By his mother's voice in his head, by 3 months of hypervigilance, by the knowledge that panic was what they wanted. He got in his car, drove, watched his mirrors. The sedan followed, not close, not obvious, but present, consistent. He called his mother on speaker. I'm being followed. Dark sedan, tinted windows. I've seen it twice before. Where are you? Heading south on 75. Should be back in the city in 20 minutes. Don't go home. Come to my house. If they follow you here, we'll have documentation and witnesses. He drove. The sedan stayed 3 car lengths back, matching his lane changes, his exits, his turns. Professional, patient. He pulled into his mother's driveway. The sedan drove past without slowing, disappeared around the corner. His mother was waiting at the door. Did you get the plate? Partial. First 3 characters, GBX. Her expression flickered. GB. You think it's connected? I think it's too coincidental to be coincidence. She ushered him inside. I'm calling Detective Riley, unofficially. She might be able to run that partial plate. Riley called back an hour later. Vivian put her on speaker. The plate comes back to a fleet vehicle, registered to a company called Sovereign Security Solutions. They're a private firm that contracts with government agencies and corporations. Who owns them? On paper? A holding company in Delaware. I can't trace it further without official resources I don't have access to anymore. Vivian's jaw tightened. Private security, surveillance. This is organized. Judge Cole, I need to tell you something. Riley's voice dropped. Yesterday, I was called into my captain's office. He asked me about my relationship with you and your son. Wanted to know if I'd been sharing case information. What did you tell him? I told him I met with David Cole once, in an official capacity, as part of my investigation, which was true at the time. A pause. He didn't believe me. He's assigned someone to review my recent activities. I think they're building a case to discipline me. For what? Unauthorized disclosure of confidential information. Conduct unbecoming. They'll find something. Riley's laugh was bitter. I knew the risks when I gave you that drive, but I wanted you to know, if they come after me, I won't change my story. The evidence is real. The pattern is real. Whatever they do to me doesn't change that." The line went dead. David looked at his mother. "They're retaliating against her. They're retaliating against everyone who helped us." Vivian's voice was steel. "But they made a mistake. They think they can intimidate people into silence. They don't understand that some people can't be intimidated. What do? We document, we prepare, and we make sure that when the DOJ investigators arrive, they have everything they need to see exactly how this department operates." The first DOJ interview was scheduled for a Tuesday in October, 6 weeks after the preliminary inquiry was opened. David arrived at the Federal Building in downtown Atlanta at 9 a.m., dressed in the same Navy suit he'd worn to his arraignment. His lawyer, a real lawyer now, hired by his mother, specializing in civil rights cases, walked beside him. The interview room was sparse: a table, 4 chairs, recording equipment in the corner. 2 investigators sat across from him, a man in his 50s, gray at the temples, with the patient demeanor of someone who'd conducted 1,000 interviews. A woman in her 40s, sharp-eyed, taking notes on a laptop. "Mr. Cole, thank you for coming in today. I'm Special Investigator Marcus Webb." David blinked. "I'm sorry, did you say Webb?" "Yes, Marcus Webb. Is there a problem?" "No, there's a project manager involved in my case with the same name." The investigator smiled slightly. "Common name. No relation, I assure you." He opened a folder. "Mr. Cole, we're here to discuss your arrest on August 14th and the events that followed. We've reviewed the documentation provided by Judge Cole and Detective Riley. Today, we'd like to hear your account in your own words." David told his story, the same story he'd told a dozen times before. But this time, someone was listening. Really listening, taking notes, asking follow-up questions. "You mentioned that Deputy Merritt told you to turn around before you could present your identification. Is that consistent with what the body camera footage shows?" "Yes, I told him my documents were in my left pocket. He told me he didn't ask what I was." "And at no point did he verify your credentials?" "Never. Not at the scene, not at the station, not at any point before I was charged." The female investigator, she'd introduced herself as Special Agent Torres, leaned forward. "Mr. Cole, have you experienced any retaliation since filing your complaint?" David hesitated. His lawyer nodded slightly. "Yes. My work credentials have been flagged at multiple sites. I've been followed by a vehicle registered to a private security company, and I received an anonymous letter suggesting that I was being deliberately targeted." "Do you have documentation of these incidents?" "Yes. Photographs, partial license plate, the original letter. We'll need copies of everything." The interview lasted 3 hours. When it was over, Investigator Webb shook David's hand. "Mr. Cole, I want you to know that we take these allegations seriously. The evidence you and others have provided suggests a troubling pattern. We'll be conducting additional interviews over the coming weeks. What happens after that? We compile our findings, present them to leadership. If the evidence supports it, we'll issue a formal report and recommendations." He paused. "This process takes time, but it is thorough, and it is independent. Whatever we find, we report." It wasn't justice. Not yet. But it was movement. Progress. The machinery of accountability, slow but grinding forward. David walked out of the Federal Building into the afternoon sun. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You talked. That was a mistake." He deleted it without responding. The DOJ interviewed 16 people over the next 3 months. David learned the details secondhand, through his lawyer and his mother's network of contacts. Deputy Merritt refused to cooperate, citing his Fifth Amendment rights. Lieutenant Dresden gave a carefully rehearsed statement that contradicted nothing and revealed nothing. Wells Hadley couldn't be located. He'd moved out of state, leaving no forwarding address. But others talked. Officers who'd witnessed misconduct but stayed silent. Victims who'd been arrested and released without explanation. Community members who'd complained through official channels and watched their complaints disappear. The pattern emerged, piece by piece, interview by interview, document by document. And through it all, the dark sedan continued to appear, near David's apartment, outside his mother's house, parked down the street from his office, never close enough to confront, never absent long enough to forget. They were watching, waiting, reminding him that they were still there. In December, Detective Riley was terminated. The official reason was violation of department policy regarding confidential information. The real reason, everyone knew, was the USB drive and the copies and the truth that she'd refused to bury. David learned about it from a news article. Local detective fired amid internal investigation. A 2-paragraph story buried on page 6. He called her. The number was disconnected. He drove to her last known address. A neighbor said she'd moved out the previous week. She'd vanished, like Hadley, like all the loose ends that someone wanted tied off. But the evidence she'd gathered was already with the DOJ, already in federal hands, already beyond the reach of anyone who wanted to make it disappear. That was something. Small comfort, but something. The system is fighting back, but so are we. Stay until the end. You need to see how this finishes. The DOJ issued its preliminary findings in February. The report was 63 pages long, dense with legal language and statistical analysis. But the summary was clear. The Civil Rights Division has identified a pattern or practice of conduct by the Fulton County Sheriff's Office that deprives persons of rights secured by the Constitution and laws of the United States. Specifically, we have found evidence of 1. Racially discriminatory enforcement of traffic and trespass laws. 2. Systematic suppression of misconduct complaints through unofficial channels. 3. Failure to discipline officers with documented patterns of biased conduct. 4. Inadequate supervision and accountability mechanisms. The department recommends comprehensive reforms including independent oversight, mandatory bias training, revised complaint procedures, and community engagement initiatives. The report didn't name names, didn't identify individuals. That wasn't its purpose. It was a structural indictment aimed at the system rather than the people who'd built it. But everyone knew who those people were. Deputy Merritt resigned 2 days after the report was released. No pension, no severance, just a quiet departure, followed by a quieter move to a different state. Lieutenant Dresden was placed on administrative leave pending a separate internal investigation. His office was cleaned out, his files were seized, and somewhere in that process, a name finally surfaced. George Brennan. Not Harold Brennan, the judge who'd presided over David's case, his brother, George Brennan, former Fulton County Commissioner, current board member of Sovereign Security Solutions, the company whose vehicles had been following David for months. GB. The initials finally had a face. David sat across from his mother in her living room, reading the new file his lawyer had obtained through federal discovery. George Brennan, 68 years old, served on the county commission for 12 years before retiring, brother of Judge Harold Brennan, close personal friend of Lieutenant Dresden, and, according to the file, a silent investor in multiple businesses that contracted with the county, including Sovereign Security Solutions. He built this, David said. The whole system, the complaint suppression, the protected officers, the private surveillance. All of it. Not alone, but he was a key architect. Vivian's voice was calm, measured. His brother provided legal cover. Dresden provided internal access. Hadley and others were foot soldiers. But George Brennan was the connector, the one who made sure everyone was aligned. Will he face charges? That's harder. He didn't arrest you, didn't file false reports, didn't directly violate any laws we can prove. He was careful to stay behind the scenes, to let others do the dirty work. So he gets away with it? I didn't say that. Vivian closed the file. The DOJ report creates pressure, political pressure, media pressure, public pressure. George Brennan's name is now associated with systemic racism and corruption. His business interests will suffer. His social standing will collapse. His brother's legacy is permanently stained. That's not justice. That's just consequences. Sometimes consequences are all we get. She looked at him. I know that's not satisfying. I know you want someone in handcuffs, but the system protects people like George Brennan. It's designed to. The best we can do is make that protection expensive. Make him radioactive. Make everyone think twice before working with him again. David stared at the wall, at the framed diploma that hung there, his mother's law degree from 35 years ago, the beginning of a career spent fighting systems that were designed to resist change. Is this what your whole career has been like? Partial victories? People getting away with things? My whole career has been like climbing a mountain that keeps growing. You reach one peak, another one appears. You win one case, 10 more are waiting. She stood, walked to the window. But the mountain doesn't grow as fast as it used to. More people are climbing now. More people are watching. The path is a little easier for each generation that comes after. That's supposed to make me feel better? It's supposed to give you perspective. She turned back to him. You're not fighting for yourself anymore, David. You stopped being just David Cole the moment I stood up in that courtroom. Now you're a symbol, a precedent, proof that the system can be challenged even if it can't be defeated. What if I don't want to be a symbol? Then you shouldn't have been my son. She smiled, sad and proud and tired. You were always going to end up here, fighting something bigger than yourself. That's what we do. That's who we are. Well, the consent decree was signed in April. It was a legally binding agreement between the DOJ and Fulton County, requiring specific reforms over a 5-year period. Independent monitor, revised training, new complaint procedures, regular reporting. Not everyone was happy with it. Critics said it didn't go far enough, that no one was being prosecuted, that the county was essentially buying its way out of accountability with promises of future change. They weren't wrong. But David had learned something over the past 8 months. Justice wasn't a destination, it was a direction. You moved toward it inch by inch, knowing you might never arrive. The day the consent decree was announced, he went back to the Midtown Tower site. The building was nearly complete now, 17 stories of glass and steel, gleaming in the April sunshine. His calculations made real. His work, standing against the sky. He walked through the gate, no security guard stopped him this time, and took the elevator to the top floor. The view stretched for miles, downtown Atlanta, Buckhead, the distant green of Piedmont Park. He'd built this. Despite everything, he'd built this. His phone buzzed, a text from his mother. "Proud of you." He smiled, put the phone away, stood there for a while longer, watching the city he'd fought for, the city that had almost broken him, the city that kept moving forward regardless of the battles happening in its streets. It wasn't over. It would never be over. But for this moment, standing on top of something he'd created, he allowed himself to feel something like peace. 3 weeks later, a manila envelope arrived at his apartment. No return address. Hand-delivered, just like the last one. Inside was a single document, a photocopy of an internal memo dated 2 months ago. The header read, "Sovereign Security Solutions, Board Meeting Minutes." Most of the text was routine business matters, budget projections, contract renewals, personnel updates, but one section had been highlighted. Item 7, Fulton County Situation. G. Brennan briefed the board on recent developments regarding the DOJ investigation. While the consent decree represents a setback, the core infrastructure remains intact. Key personnel have been relocated to adjacent jurisdictions. Documentation has been secured. Contingency planning continues. Action items. Accelerate expansion into Clayton and Cobb counties. Identify replacement assets within FCSO. Monitor ongoing litigation for exposure risks. Maintain surveillance protocols on primary subjects until further notice. Primary subjects. David stared at the words. They were still watching, still planning, still building their system piece by piece, county by county. The consent decree hadn't stopped them. It had just made them more careful. He called his mother, read her the memo. Silence on the line. Long, heavy silence. "This is proof," she finally said. "Proof that the misconduct is ongoing. Proof that they're expanding their operation. Proof that the DOJ settlement isn't the end. What do we do with it? We give it to the federal investigators, add it to the record, make sure they know this isn't over. And then we keep fighting." Her voice was steady, resolved. "They want us to give up, to accept the partial victory and move on, but that's not who we are. That's not what we do." David looked out his window at the Atlanta skyline. The same view he'd looked at 1,000 times, but different now. Darker. "Someone inside their organization sent this to me. Someone who wants them exposed." "Yes." "Who?" "I don't know. Maybe we never will. But whoever they are, they're taking an enormous risk, and that tells me something important." "What?" "That even in the heart of corruption, there are people who believe in the truth. People who are willing to fight, even when fighting seems hopeless." A pause. "You're not alone, David. You never were." The DOJ reopened its investigation 2 weeks later. New subpoenas, new interviews, new documents, the machinery of accountability grinding forward again. George Brennan's name appeared in the news for the first time. County Commissioner's brother linked to police misconduct investigation. The story was small at first, buried in the metro section, but it grew. Other reporters picked it up. Other victims came forward. The mountain kept growing, but so did the number of climbers. In June, David received a formal apology from the Fulton County Sheriff's Office. It was a form letter, carefully worded by lawyers, admitting nothing specific while expressing regret for any inconvenience caused. Standard boilerplate. Meaningless, in isolation. But attached to it was a check. Settlement of his civil lawsuit against the county. The amount was substantial, enough to cover his legal fees, his lost wages during suspension, and then some. He cashed the check. Donated half to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, put the rest in savings. Money wasn't justice, but it was recognition. Acknowledgement that something wrong had happened, even if no one was willing to say exactly what. He framed the apology letter and hung it in his office. Not as a trophy, as a reminder. This is what it takes, the frame said. This is what you have to fight for, just to get someone to say, "We're sorry." 1 year after his arrest, David stood on a stage in the Fulton County Community Center. The audience was 50 people, community members, activists, journalists, a few politicians who wanted to be seen on the right side of history. Behind him, a banner read, "Justice for Fulton, 1-year anniversary." He hadn't wanted to speak. Public speaking wasn't his strength, but his mother had convinced him. "People need to hear from someone who went through it," she'd said. "Not a lawyer, not a judge, someone like them." He stepped up to the microphone, cleared his throat. "A year ago I was arrested for doing my job." The room was silent, listening. "I had documentation, authorization, every piece of paper they asked for. But none of it mattered, because the officer who arrested me didn't see a structural engineer. He saw a black man in a place where black men weren't supposed to be." He told the story. Not the legal version, with statutes and citations and procedural arguments. The human version. The fear, the humiliation, the moment when everything he'd worked for almost disappeared because someone with a badge decided he didn't belong. "I'm standing here today because I had advantages most people don't have. A good lawyer, resources to fight, a mother who knew how to navigate the system." He paused. "But I shouldn't have needed those things. No one should need a federal judge in their corner just to get a fair hearing." The room murmured. Agreement, recognition. "The consent decree is a start. The investigation is ongoing, but we're not done. The people who built this system are still out there, still working, still planning. They've learned to be more careful, but they haven't learned to be better." He looked out at the faces watching him. Black faces, brown faces, white faces, all of them tired, all of them fighting. "So we keep fighting too. We document, we prepare, we show up at every hearing, every meeting, every election. We make it impossible for them to operate in the shadows, and we remind them every single day that we're watching too." Applause. Not thunderous, but real. He stepped away from the microphone. His mother was in the front row, clapping with the rest. "Proud of you," her eyes said. He nodded. Walked off stage. The fight continued. Epilogue. 18 months after the consent decree, the first compliance report was issued. The county had implemented 60% of required reforms. New training programs, revised complaint procedures, an independent oversight board with limited but real authority. Deputy Merritt was working as a private security guard in Alabama, no longer in law enforcement, no longer carrying a badge. Lieutenant Dresden was convicted of obstruction of justice for destroying evidence related to the investigation. He received 18 months in federal prison, less than he deserved, but more than anyone expected. Judge Harold Brennan died of a heart attack 6 months after his retirement. The Judicial Qualifications Commission investigation was closed without findings. His obituary mentioned his distinguished career and commitment to justice. It did not mention his brother. George Brennan remained free. His business interests suffered, but he survived. Sovereign Security Solutions continued to operate, though with a lower profile and fewer government contracts. The machinery he'd built was damaged but not destroyed. And Detective Riley, the woman who'd risked everything to expose the truth, was eventually reinstated. A federal judge ruled that her termination was retaliatory, a violation of whistleblower protections. She returned to internal affairs with a promotion and a mandate to continue the work she'd started. The system remained imperfect, corrupt in some places, resistant to change in others, but incrementally, painfully, it was moving. David Cole returned to work, built buildings, raised a family, lived a life, but he never forgot. Every time he entered a construction site, he made sure his documentation was in order. Every time a security guard asked for his credentials, he presented them calmly, clearly, with the knowledge of what could happen if he didn't. He kept the anonymous letters in a safe deposit box, the one about being a target, the one with the board meeting minutes, evidence of a system that still existed, still watched, still waited. Some nights, he saw the dark sedan parked down the street from his house. Some nights, he didn't. He'd learned to live with the uncertainty, the vigilance, the knowledge that his name was still on someone's list somewhere. His mother retired from the bench at 70. She spent her remaining years mentoring young lawyers, writing articles about judicial reform, and visiting her grandchildren every Sunday for dinner. She never apologized for keeping her career secret for 34 years. She never explained why she'd chosen to reveal herself when she did. But on her 80th birthday, she gave David a card. Inside, she'd written, "The system doesn't change because powerful people decide to be fair. It changes because ordinary people refuse to accept unfairness. You taught me that. I'm proud of who you became." He kept the card in his wallet, next to his driver's license, next to the authorization documents he still carried everywhere, just in case. And somewhere in Atlanta, in an office building with no name on the door, a man named Judge Brennan sat at a desk covered in papers. He was 80 years old now, slower than he used to be, but still working, still planning, still building. On his desk was a file. Inside the file was a photograph. David Cole, structural engineer, primary subject. Brennan looked at the photograph for a long moment. Then he closed the file and put it in a drawer with dozens of others. The game continued. It always continued. But now, at least, there were people watching, people documenting, people refusing to look away. And that made all the difference. For everyone who's ever been arrested for doing their job, for everyone who's fought a system designed to break them, for everyone who's still fighting. The mountain keeps growing. But so do we. David Cole never walked onto a construction site the same way again. Not because he was afraid, because he understood now that the most dangerous structures were not unfinished beams or improperly cured concrete, but systems that looked solid from the outside while quietly crushing the people inside them. A year after the consent decree, David was invited to speak at a state university's engineering school. The title of the lecture was innocuous enough: Professional Responsibility in High-Risk Environments. But the room was packed. Mostly black and brown students, some white, all young, all still believing that competence alone was armor. David stood behind the podium longer than necessary before speaking. "There is no calculation," he said finally, "that guarantees safety, not in engineering, not in life." He told them about the gate, about the code that was valid, about the paperwork that existed but was never read. "I did everything right," he said, "and it still didn't matter." A hand went up in the third row. "If you could go back," the student asked, "would you do anything differently?" David thought of the handcuffs, the wall, the way the deputy's voice never changed, no matter what David said. "No," he said, "but I would document sooner. I would assume that truth alone is not enough, and I would stop believing that systems automatically recognize legitimacy." Silence filled the room. "Your degree will not protect you," he added. "Your excellence won't either. Only records do. Only witnesses. Only pressure." Some students nodded. Some didn't understand yet. They would. Vivian Cole retired quietly. No ceremony, no farewell speech, just a closed-door meeting with a group of younger judges, where she said exactly one sentence: "The system doesn't fail because bad people are powerful. It fails because good people get tired." Then she walked out of the courthouse she had entered for 4 decades. Retirement didn't mean disappearance. She wrote constantly, articles, anonymous memoranda, policy critiques routed through professional back channels. She no longer carried authority, but she carried something more destabilizing: institutional memory. She remembered names, patterns, the judges who looked away, and she never forgot Judge Brennan. Judge Brennan didn't collapse after the DOJ report. He adjusted. That was his gift. His company lost contracts in Fulton County, but gained new ones 2 counties over. Personnel were shuffled, titles changed, logos redesigned. The infrastructure survived because it had been designed to survive. He stopped attending public events, stopped returning calls from old friends, but he kept working. In a private office with no signage, Judge Brennan maintained a filing system that had nothing to do with finances or zoning. People, photographs, timelines, risk assessments. David Cole's file wasn't thick anymore. It didn't need to be. The goal was no longer pressure. The goal was containment. David felt it in subtle ways. Projects reassigned without explanation. Security delays that always resolved, eventually. Background checks that took just long enough to remind him someone was watching. Nothing illegal, nothing provable. That was the point. His civil rights attorney called it soft suppression. "You're not being punished," she said. "You're being slowed." David learned to live with it. He married, had children, taught his son how to keep receipts, taught his daughter how to record conversations when something felt wrong. Not fear, preparation. 2 years after the consent decree, Detective Riley resurfaced publicly. She testified before a state legislative committee on whistleblower retaliation. Her voice was calm, controlled, devastating. "I did not leak information," she said. "I preserved it." Her reinstatement sent shockwaves through internal affairs divisions statewide. Quietly, policies changed. Complaint routing procedures were rewritten. Oversight became marginally less optional. Marginal change, but real. George Brennan watched the hearing on a delayed stream. He didn't rage, he took notes. The system was wounded, not dead. The last time David saw Brennan was by accident. A fundraising gala. Different cause, different city. They passed each other near the bar. No words were exchanged. Brennan looked older, slower, but his eyes were the same, calculating, detached, unburdened by guilt. David felt no triumph, only clarity. This wasn't about winning, it was about surviving long enough to leave a record. On the 10th anniversary of his arrest, David stood alone on the roof of Midtown Tower. The building still stood, so did the system. Both altered, both scarred. His phone buzzed, a text from his mother, still watching. David smiled faintly. He had learned something most people never did. Systems don't change because someone exposes them once. They change because someone refuses to stop documenting. The mountain kept growing, but so did the climbers, and this time, fewer were climbing alone.
Thank you for taking the time to watch this video today. If you found the content helpful, please remember to like and subscribe so you won't miss our upcoming episodes. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to leave a comment below. We are always here to listen.